Hello, welcome to my talk, Narrative Structures for Better Game Design. Who am I? I'm Ranko Trifkovic, I'm better known as Grandpa Tiger, and I come from backgrounds of both writing and game design. I was a game designer, then game producer, but before that I was a game journalist, a novelist, a creative writer teacher. Then I realized that my superpower is structural analysis and that narrative is my passion, that I'm dedicated to combining the narrative and games. I teach writers how to enter the world of gaming and how to make games, as well as teach game developers and designers what is a narrative and how to combine it with games. Also, my market manager will kill me if I don't mention that Grandpa's narrative design is my personal branding, while the Red Viking is our studio, and we mostly make educational games, edutainment games, but also provide all kinds of services to indie teams. So, another thing is, I've teamed up with RTC, the guys who are behind the fantastic software for narrative design, but also many other kinds of writing. It's a visual database, and I'll be handing out keys, 6-month keys, in the QA session. Okay, so let's see, what's the main difference between writing a game and writing for a game? So writing a game, when I say writing a game, I mean there is a subtle difference between writing a game and writing for a game, because there are certain games which are written, which the approach to make them is almost the same, like making a video, making a movie, making a screenplay, or even making a full-size novel. Of course, there's linearity, non-linearity, and interactivity that comes into play, but most popular genres of this sort are like game books, choose your adventure books, interactive fiction, visual novels, but also adventure games as a genre. So these games are developed exactly the same way, or at least somewhat the same way the novel are. They have a gameplay in a sense of reading. So a reading and making choices after that, reading and making some little puzzles or mini games after, is what the gameplay is. So game design has to be really connected to the narrative design, because you have really so few elements. Anchors of this type of game are theme, plot, continuum. So you need to know what you want to say and how you're gonna say it, how is your plot illustrating your point, and of course immersion in the game is done through narrative exclusively. So we play this game because we want to read the content. Okay, so what's writing for a game? Writing for a game is like, first thing that comes to mind is fluff, you know, lore, bestiarium, compendium or some wiki, quest descriptions, copy for games, you know, all the text that are needed for the games, or item descriptions or spell descriptions. But also you'll see that I've done something sacrilegious here. I've added dialogues as fluff, which is of course not where I would want them to be, but so many game studios and game developers approach the dialogues as fluff and treat it as fluff, like, okay, anyone can write this. It's not something we should call an expert, especially not a narrative designer, which to many indie studios sounds so expensive and so pricey, and so like, oh, let's not do it. So yeah, dialogues are very important because they're part of the character element, and characters are like, they have to be memorable. There's something that player connects to, and connects through the game with characters. So dialogues are not only characterization, dialogues are also moving the plot forward, giving the information to the player. So characters are dialogues are like super important. But yeah, they often put in the same rank as fluff. But for this game, what I wanted to say is more important, and that's that you use a narrative design elements along with the game design elements, and these are the games where the game design comes first. And so you have like a theme and a plot and the characters, also some episodes and some story flow, but you don't use them as a forethought, like you don't start from it. You start by adding it to the gameplay, adding it to the game design, and asking yourself constantly, how do these elements combine with my game design elements? What parts of these narrative elements we can use? So although they need structure, they're not being crafted first, so to speak. I would also add that in here, world is very important. Like, how do you transform your world building into a setting? Because world building is like geography and maps, and setting is how these elements interact with your game and with your story. And also you have to ask yourself, how do these elements also narrate by themselves? Because don't forget, game design elements also tell a story. That's why narrative designer is not a game writer. That's narrative design is not like just dealing with text. Narrative design is about how to make all the aspects of your game narrate. Okay, cool. So anchors for this kind of game is slightly different. So anchors should be pillars of fantasy. Like, what do you want your players to feel? What do you want your players to experience? What do you want your players to imagine they are, you know? And also the gameplay, like what's the core loop? What are the action verbs? Like, for example, in platformers, jump, move, those are the action verbs. So there is a subtle difference, as you can see, and a subtly different approach, but narrative structures are going to be very helpful for both, especially when you have more game design involved. So why structures? Because structures is giving the quality to the elements. Here we see some funny picture of a diamond and a graphite. So yeah, diamond and a graphite are made from same building blocks, carbon atoms. But the way they are structured, the way they are ordered, it makes all the difference and makes all the different qualities. I'm not saying that diamond is better than a graphite. I just say that if you want your electric conductivity, you'll pick graphite. But if you want your hardness, you'll pick diamond, of course. So you have to know what kind of structures to use for your game. That's why it's important to know the structures. But also, the structure is important because they are part of the laws of perception. So we perceive things as patterns. We like to find patterns. We like to see patterns. We also tell stories each other through different patterns. That's why you find these sweet memes on the internet, like 32 dramatic situations, or like 16 situations of men versus this or that. Because if you show me a stick figure, and then a stick figure with a bottle of booze, and then a stick figure like in a grave, I'll say, okay, this man drank himself to death. Maybe it's not true. Maybe you just showed me 3 random pictures, but my mind will construct a story from elements. So just like these Gestalt laws, they're like, you create patterns from like the laws. Like, okay, does this continue? Does this break? Does this come together? So the way we perceive stories is through patterns, through these elements of the story that, when structured properly, show us the pattern and then give us the story. It's especially important for games, because in games you often cannot afford to tell a linear story. You cannot even afford to tell a story in a continuous way. So you need to have this like story beats, story moments, like little episodes that player will connect. But don't forget, the player will also try to connect the game design elements as well. If they're not connected to your narrative, then you've lost them. You've just confused them. So here we have some example of like the simplest narrative structure, Aristotle's 3 or 5 point structure. And why does this structure survive for thousands of years? Because that's the way we perceive stories. Like, if you tell me a story, it needs to have some change. As you see, the beginning point is not the same as the ending point. Something changed. And why do we have these peaks and valleys? Because if your story doesn't have a dramatic change, then everyone is going to ask why you're telling me this. If I tell you like, oh, I met this granny at the market, and like, and well, nothing, she was just old, and well, she spilled some beans, and I don't know, she just did that. That's just a sequence of events. It's not a structured story. You have to tell me like how something changed in a significant way throughout the story for me to be engaged. That's why this structure still persists, but it's not the only structure, just to know. There's also, of course, hero's journey, the hero cycle, and it's been a bit overused because I think it's more appropriate to be used as blueprint for how the character changes, because character has to change as well. You cannot have like same character throughout all the story. That's why people like RPGs where you get these upgrades and whatnot. But I also want to tell you about the semiotic square, where it's very good for games, because I can explain it in a form of Cinderella. Like, Cinderella starts by someone not looking like a princess and not being a princess. She's just a poor girl. But then she transforms into someone who looks like a princess, but is not a princess. And then, because the prince notices her and wants to dance with her, she, runs away, and then she again doesn't look like a princess, but she could be a princess because he's after her. And then in the end, she is a princess and she looks like a princess, and everyone's happy. So why is this important for me to tell you now? Because games which need to be sort of having a bit more relaxed structure, not this classical 3-point structure, can work really well with a semiotic square structure. So look it up. So here we have a narrative designer, a game writer, a game producer, a lead developer, and can you guess who's who? Okay, a big mess arrives at every studio when it comes to stories. I mean, people so like to make mess when it comes to stories, and it's normal because we are creatures of the story. Every one of us lives their life thinking that they are the main character in their own story. And yeah, the sequence of events is often like, okay, what's happened? I mean, you don't ask people like, what's your theme of your thoughts lately? You ask them, how have you been? What's new? How is it going? They want to know the plot of your story. So everyone sufficiently intelligent and sufficiently creative and sufficiently able to speak a language thinks that they can write the story, and they're right. I mean, I don't deny that writing a story is like a universal thing that everyone can do. It's just that when it comes to games, it can be a slightly difficult, and it does need a bit more understanding about narrative design and the structures. Structure is also important because you will have a disjointed pipeline. I've seen so many times not only in studios but also in organization of a solo developer that narrative is kept apart from the game design. So you will have in a studio, for example, you will have narrative leads and narrative people who just don't have idea what kind of context their text will be in, but also you have game designers who are just creating these abstract rules and stuff and picking the best elements, but they have no idea what kind of text there will be, what kind of story there will be, or what kind of intricate details will be. Here, I want to stress out very important thing, and that's that no one failed narrative design like miserably in one big mistake, because you all know something about the stories, right? It's just that in narrative design, speaking of the structure, we can imagine it as a structure for a bridge. Tiny mistakes pile up, small mistakes pile up, cracks appear. Change a thing here, change a thing there, and then you don't know how it's going to reflect further on. And then suddenly you have a collapsing bridge just because you believe that you can, build it in one go all by yourself. And it's not true, because you really need to align all the elements. You can do it by yourself if you know how to align all the elements, how to build this solid structure. Also, why structures? Because they help you retain control. They really do. I mean, if you write a game, then it's going to be a novel sized at least. I mean, we're talking about 70, 80, 100,000 words. That's like 2 full novels. Even if you're writing for a game, there's going to be a lot of text, a lot of interplaying elements, a lot of elements with moving parts, So in order to keep track of what you're doing, I do recommend you all the time use structures, and preferably use some software that can help you keep up the flow. So if structures are the way, the key, the mapping of the structures is the way. So what's a map of a structure? It doesn't have to be graphical. Here we see typical three act structure described through different terms. So someone will have a setup, debate, fun and games, bad guy closing, finale. Someone will have like a setup, confrontation, resolution. Someone will have like different steps. But the point is, you do need to keep track of in a clear way what's going on. It, as I said, it can be really visual map for those of you who are more visually inclined. It can be a list, and it can be something like this, like an ordered thing. I'm speaking about maps. The structures. Yeah, I will explain it as I go along, because structure is a big theme and sort of basic, so to speak. So I assume you already know something about the structures. So, for example, if we see the structure of the visual novels, I want to point out that there can be different maps and different structures. For example, this is a plot structure. So this is not going to explain us how the episodes are lined up. This is going to explain us how plot significantly branches out in a visual novel, for example. So we have your start. We have this red bar, which is like a common route, the route that player will take every time they replay a game. So it's a part of the story where the build-up happens. And then you have these threads, and as you see, these threads meander left and right, but they don't really branch out. They don't create their own arcs. That's because you should not confuse mapping the structure with mapping the game flow. That's something else. Or mapping the episodes, again, something else. So the structure of your plot is like the basic. It's the first thing that you do. For example, here we see two typical examples. One is on the left is the example of how the action style, so to say, visual novels would work, in the sense that in the left corner is the map of how a visual novel where players' actions influence the world and change the events and the world inside of the story, how it play out with with these branches and the possibility to jump between branches one more time. And on the right we have this typical, I call it character-based approach, which is quite typical because the events stay the same, but the characters' attitudes, thinking, feeling, emotions influences the character itself, builds the character itself, while he progresses or she progresses through more or less the same events. And that's why this core tree, core trunk main story is going to be quite long, with this dramatic change at the very end, and then branching out is basically moving towards the end according to what character deserved, so to speak. So it's more like about attitudes and character decisions than changing the entire story dramatically, so that the two branches cannot no longer travel together. Here is an example of an episode map. As you can see, it's getting messy. So the squares are individual episodes, and the red pills are the dead ends, bad ends, and green pills are like good endings, and yellow pills are like endings or whatever. And as you see, someone did a great job of coloring this, because a single episode can belong to exposition, to introduction, to different moments of your plot structure. So or I don't know, maybe it's different game areas, whatever, but for those who are visually inclined, you can really make super great stuff with colors and shapes. And here we have it is shown how in a game story progresses from episode to episode, from station to station, from the scene to scene, so to speak. And it's very important because it can help you mark the areas where the game happens physically. And also in many games, this map is quite similar to the game flow map. Okay, so the way your game progresses, and I don't mean the game flow map in sense of the algorithmic approach, like what's the core loop. I mean the game flow, like where the player goes and where they can progress, and so on and so forth. So for example, this is like a bit in depth look. Like imagine this previous slide like blown up. So this would be a very helpful thing to, because this can be like representing not only the episodes but the game areas. For example, in some games things can happen. The story moves forward when you move to location, and then that location is sort of yeah, it does look a bit like maps from the old point and click games, but it can be also a map of episodes. And there's something I call the perception map, which sort of comes on top of this. And this perception map is sort of not only telling you what's unlockable where, but also telling you about the narrative, like how does the player progress through the narrative. What is the player should know before going further. For example, here I have like a blue box as a start, and then we can have like I, and this I should represent like introduction parts of the story, and then E code like E1, E2 like episodes of the exposition, so like a further development. And only when there's enough introduction and exposition, then we can start to keep tracking of like what's the episodes, like SO1, SO2, SO3, like what are the episodes that move the story forward. And then like C1 or C1A is like climax episodes, so player can reach climax in different ways. And then we can have, of course, bad ending, good ending, or early elimination in the trap. So perception map can also be a list. So for example, here we have introduction, exposition, first challenge, second challenge. These are the parts of the structure, plot structure. And then we have like info, which is important to be planted early. And it's very important to keep track of, because the earlier you plant some info, the later it will explode. I mean, in a good way. So for example, if the player doesn't, here we have like introduction. Wearing less clothes is more proper than wearing more clothes. Yeah, it's from a erotic romance game. I'll introduce these games later. So, for example, in this game, wearing less clothes is more proper than wearing more clothes, and it's not something like we would know intuitively. We have to be informed as the players about it, because in an interactive fiction story, which this project was, it's very important to notice that game choices are game design, basically. So you need to figure out how to make the game design smooth by making the timed and properly informed choices. I was talking about this on last year, I think, here on GDS. So we can make a list of like what are the info that we need to present to the player so that we can have later better choices, which is for the interactive fiction better game design. And we can tell it like, okay, in exposition we have to explain that Yasmin, some character, is kind of unfair because it's later going to come into play. And then we can have this sort of overview of what player needs to know. And it's a very important map, and I didn't see a lot of narrative designers even mention it. But I'm sure it goes by some different names anyway. Okay, so let me introduce first of the two games I want to present as my case. First is the Land of No Twilight by Klara Raškaj. She's a very young and very bright game designer and writer. She's a writer of adult fiction, erotic stories. And she created a romantic fantasy interactive fiction story, Land of No Twilight. I was their teacher of narrative design and a consultant for this title. It's still under construction, so I didn't present any screenshots because it's going to be interactive fiction, which means like it's going to have like a lot of text anyway. So she started from idea that she wants to have like this inner motive externalize, make art about it, and her deeper inner motive was the problems of prejudice and also clash of old versus young, because she's young and she's very smart, and she probably have seen a very very big number of old farts saying to her like, oh no, you cannot do this or you cannot do that. So so she decided to like develop this internal motive into 2 layers, like a front team, which is like old versus young, wisdom versus of the old versus the impetuous nature of the youth. And then she decided to also build a deeper theme, like prejudices born out of the lack of understanding and also lack of communication. So so these are the anchors, like that's what she would like to build. Why do I introduce you my case with these? Because in my opinion, the structures are also important because they help you, start somewhere and then decide what your project is anchored in. A lot of mistakes comes out from like having just a vague idea what's going on. Yeah, I had to cut out the third game from this talk, even though it was announced, because basically when I analyzed it later, I realized that it's a game project which failed because I didn't know what I really wanted to make, so I made some big mess. Anyway, so the plot is like there's a young woman in a kingdom, and it's a fantasy kingdom, but not really humans. There are some sort of they're related to plants or something, and then there are 2 kings, a day king and a night king, and everyone's unhappy with these kings, and then she wants to replace them both, and then she can end up romancing one or the both, and yeah, so that's the basic of the game. Let Bions be Bygones is made by Djordje Marković, a bright young artist and developer. He goes by Bohemian Pulp, which I'm sure will be interesting for you to check out. And he's making a futuristic noir story with point-and-click gameplay and a strong narrative focus, which means he wanted to create an adventure game, but the one where there's no like a million puzzles, where there's no like thousands of inventory objects. He wanted to make a game which plays like point and click, but reads, has this noir narrative flow, in the sense that player always at least knows where to try to go next or what to do next. There's not too much break in the game flow, like okay, now you stop, you're stuck, you don't know what to do. So I was also a narrative design teacher for this one, and later I've joined the project as a consultant for game design as well. And this game, compared to the previous one, will have more game design elements, and I'll explain you how the structures helped improve. So here is the art style, very good, very cool. I wish you can see this in animated form. It's really amazing. And as you see, the part of the screen is dedicated to the visuals, and the part of screen is dedicated to this narrative. And yeah, that's where he's gonna do the choices and everything. So his anchors was quite vague, in the sense that he wanted to make a pixel art game in the style of LucasArts, the old adventure games. He wanted to be a cyberpunk, futuristic detective noir story, and he wanted one of the main characters to be a bion, like a bionic creature, like a living robot or something, because he was into the themes, exploring the themes of death. But his themes were a bit all over the place, because he also wanted to have the themes of rich versus poor, and biblical descent into sins, and wow, it was really like a big mess. So when I started doing narrative design on this one, we really needed to focus primarily on what the game pillars are going to be, because so far we only had these like urges, like goals of the developer, and it didn't go well because he wanted to stick with his old story quite a long time. And then it was exactly the structures that helped sort of iron out everything. Yeah, can't wait to tell you about this. So let me introduce the story a bit to you. So for example, this is a story timeline overview, one of the possible structure maps. So this is like, especially when you have a complex story that's going to be very interactive, because player can choose wherever they want to go. I always recommend you to have like a fixed timeline. So In day one, Lucy, which is a robot, she goes down to the pit. So he has like two areas of the town: the spire, which is like everyone rich living, and the pit where everyone rest of us are living. So yeah, the robot is escaping the lab. She's having some friends. She visits the pit, and they party in this crazy bar Inferno. Then she runs away and disappears. It's a problem for her owners. So Lady D, this up noble or whatever, she hires Cooper, detective. He starts investigation. That's player. Then he doesn't know, but she's hijacked, sold at the black market. He gets drugged. He doesn't progress anywhere. Then she's abused in some crazy decadent VIP show, kills everyone, runs out to a person called Preacher, passes out there. And then the later detective discovers about the massacre, learns about her being dismantled, hunts her down, hunts the Preacher down, just in the moment to see her stolen, her body dumped. He retrieves her head, and that's the big what's going to happen next. Why I'm telling you this? Because as you see, we had this problem of connecting the narrative with game design from the get-go, because this is supposed to be an adventure. This is supposed to be a game where player can do stuff, and we have these quite hard-coded events which actually tell you what the player will eventually do or not. So it's really like quite difficult to craft the narrative intertwined with the sort of free-form game with this hard coded timeline. So we did by starting to develop a flexible structure, a flexible plot structure. So first of all, we decided to have a prologue, which is like a scene meeting meeting the landlord, and you can play it out actually on the link I've shown you. There is demo version of the game. So in the prologue, like, it's a tutorial. It's also for a player to get the feel of the game, but you also get this flashback to connect you with the detective story and to connect the player with the character better. Then we have the introduction part of the structure, plot structure, where he's hired by the lady. There's some exploration done in the office, but we stick with one location. Then comes the exposition, when we can expect further detective work, and there is like a limited scope for the story, because we want player to have a freedom of exploring within this chapter. So this whole chapter is not linear, although the whole story is. So that's why I call it flexible structure. And then we of course have the flashback number 2, and then story moves on. Of course, there's a third chapter and the ending, but yeah, I just wanted to show you the compact overview. So how did this influence the game design? Because author had a dilemma of how to deliver a story, and what should the game verbs be? What should a player actually do? So we invented this sort of game flow / episodes map, which is also a sort of spatial map for the game. It's not exactly, but I'll explain in a moment. So prologue is happening in the office and in the old office, like it's happening in the flashback. Introduction is completely in the office, and then chapter 1 has this fixed narrative within this chapter, but the player can move between the office, metro station, baths, market, different areas, and each area has like a little scenes. So for example, there's like 3 or 4 scenes in the bath, like 5 possible scenes in the metro station, and the player goes through there, gathers the clues, and connects the dots, so to speak. But he doesn't have to do all of it in order to receive the story. So the story progresses if the player goes to Inferno, when they end up in the pub, and then there is a little flashback to the old office. So this enabled us to create a game flow which is really a bit open, and it offers interactivity, because the story is not exactly the same if you experience all the scenes or not. The plot structure doesn't change, the story doesn't deviate, but it doesn't prevent player from having a different experience, especially because the story is then not being told through events only, but through every experience of the game, of the gameplay. So for example, when the player explores something, that's the clue, not only the gameplay clue but the narrative clue as well. When the player talks to certain characters, they also get a little chunks of info. And then when they move to the Inferno, they have the chance to explore more and push the story forward. So this kind of bottlenecking is typical, and it's allowed, it's okay, because it helps you create control the game flow, of course. But why is it a big deal? I mean, why do I make a big deal out of structures? Because this seems like normal, like why isn't every game made like this? Well, I have to remind you that when we're creating, we're sort of in a deep state of this creative blindness, almost. As like I mean, this guy had to like draw every pixel art character and make every animation and code it and write and everything, and as soon as you start creating something, you're completely into it and you're like swimming through a dark water. So if you don't have prepared structure in advance, this is really going to be difficult. And by the time we reach this, so it can be made into like a normal a nice game, it was headed in the direction of not really being clear what's the story, not really being clear what are the characters, not really being clear what's going to be a gameplay. And it had a danger of escaping from the hands of the author. Like, he wanted to have this adventure with no puzzles and no inventory puzzles, especially no juggling of the inventory. But then it would start going there, because he would have to invent something to come to fill the time of the gameplay with something, and then he probably say like, okay, let's slap just a puzzle in here. But this way, the story is the puzzle, and he created really tight connection between the game design and the story, because everything the player does, reads, experiences as an animation or something is contributing both to the game and to the narrative. So let's see the Land of No Twilight. As you can see, the game flow here is somewhat simpler. Like, the girl challenges the sovereigns, she demands change in eligibility. Then there is first challenge, and she wins that, and then there's a chance of romancing the king. And then there's the second challenge, she fails it, and then she's trying to recover, and then the good king tries to help her, and then she can again try to romance or stay out of it. And then depends on her choices, she can prove to be stubborn youngling who asks no help, and then she fails, or be a good girl and try to cooperate, and then she can win. And then deciding whether she decides to lose or win, she can also experience different romantic options. So basically there are like 2 sets of endings and 3 different endings for each set, whether she ends up alone or with one of the kings. I'm pretty sure there's a secret ending when she can get both kings, but I didn't ask yet about it. But my point is, as you can see, it's a simple game flow. It's a simple structure. So what's the problem? The problem is that it's an interactive fiction. So she has to rely on reading and making choices as her only gameplay. So the only game design is choices, and choices need to be meaningful, so the players can feel like they're making interesting decisions, because what are games than a bunch of interesting decisions? And I mean, like, either choices, or like even in Twitch games, like you're making this visceral decision, so to speak. Her challenge in her game was how to make sure that the player is not just reading through a lot of text, and then reaching few crucial choices, and that's it. So we had to invent the way to use the episode structure to see how to enrich the experience for the player, how to create properly paced choices, because that's the game design for this kind of games, where the player will have all kind of involving decisions to make, and where different values can be collected and used within the story to sort of customize this journey, customize this experience. Because there is a simple game flow. There is this simple plot structure, like it's not diverging too much. but it doesn't mean that you cannot create a quite nicely varied and detailed customized experience. What I'm talking about is like we set and decided to see what number of episodes we have in each place of the structure. So again, the horizontal line is our plot structure. Like this is a prologue, this is the beginning, this is the exposition, this is the episode, this is the peak of drama, and these are the endings. And we decided to see how many episodes do we have to tell the whole story. And it turns out that our beginning and exposition are the longest. And then the episodes are quite streamlined, like the things happen, and there's like dramatic choices in there. And then peak of drama is where she basically has to, you know, bring the most make the most important choice, and then this filters out the different endings. So speaking of looking at this, we realized that we have a beginning and exposition, a quite nice number of episodes to present player with different situations, which will not only introduce player to the game, but also enable player to make these small but important decisions. And we decided to tailor it after 4 different values. So like a black workers affiliate, black king affiliate, white workers affiliate or the white king affiliate, a romance, which is painted red in here, and respect, which is painted green. So basically what happens is that a player makes choices which are not only related to to her relationship to the king, but also like, does she help the day-night worker or the daylight worker or night-light worker? Because these guys are some sort of planets, and some thrive at night, some thrive at day. Does she respect her elders? Does she treat people with respect, or does she react more with emotional and almost romantic involvement? So there were like many chances to craft really nice episodes, nice scenes that are presented in linear fashion. They don't branch out, but they sort of gather data. They present important options to the player, and then depending on the outcome of these beginning episodes, in exposition we can have like more diverse. For example, a same episode in the one episode in exposition can have several layers. Like, what if she has this level of black or white affiliation? What if she has this or that level of romance versus respect? So that the episodes, the core of the episodes in narrative sense is the same. The same things happen, but there are subtle differences which are influenced by her previous choices, and then it cascades sort of through the whole beginning and exposition, so that when the episodes come, the player can follow the story, focus on what's really important, like the relationship to these kings, but the experience will be slightly different for each rerun or for each player. And that's what made possible. That was made possible by examining these maps and structures. And that's why, otherwise, it would be just a story which is like too linear or almost very non-linear, and then we have to cram it with interactivity, which usually ends up in disaster, because then you end up adding the fast-paced choices that diminish the meaningfulness of them, or it's difficult to come up with a string of such choices. So this was like going in the best direction, because we streamlined the game design for this kind of game and connected it even tighter to the narrative, because respect versus rebellion is in the core of this game, and that's what the player will constantly be exploring. So yes, thank you for your time, thank you for your attention. You can contact me here. I have this tradition that always after the talk I talked with everyone who wants to get something get my help in sense like, oh, can I help you with your game or with your project, with your ideas? So do ask questions, but also feel free to schedule a talk where I can help you. By the end of this month, I offer free consultations, 30-minute consultations for everyone. So yeah, feel free to contact me. Also, stay tuned for the keys, because I will be handing out some RTC draft 6-month keys. And yeah, thanks you for watching.